Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another episode of Voices for Excellence. I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group and proud host of VFE. And today's episode, we are celebrating 1 year of existence, Agile Evolutionary Group. And I want to thank everybody for supporting this new journey, as well as supporting my book and supporting this podcast. And for our 1 year anniversary, our 1 year celebration, I wanted to bring on someone who has served as a longtime mentor of mine, dating back to, I used to reference his books when I was implementing instructional strategies when I was a teacher. So he has been inspirational in my life. When I started out as an educator, and also when I started to move into executive positions, chief academic officer, superintendent, assistant superintendent. Dr. Bill Daggett has always been there for me. And and this is a story, and Dr. Daggett, thank you. He wants me to call him Bill, but it's still hard for me because there's so much respect for him. But I remember I was in the development process of my book. And Dr. Daggett, or Bill, I'm still going to call you Dr. Daggett. It's hard for me to do that, but the inspiration of my framework was from the rigor and relevance framework, and then also the framework from the DSEI, the Daggett System of Effective Instruction. So when I was developing my book, I actually went up to Dr. Daggett's office to have him rigorously review my framework, and he provided great feedback with that and brought it back and continued to ideate and iterate around it. And what you see today, Dr. Daggett was one of the first people to preview that. So it is my absolute honor to have one of the legends in education on Voices for Excellence. He has inspired and influenced many across the country as well as internationally. Dr. Bill Daggett. Bill, thank you for coming on. How are you, my friend? It's so good to see you.
I'm great, Michael, and we're all so proud of everything you've done. And when you start saying, when you were a teacher and all these, it just shows how old I really am. Still working full time, so that's good.
Yes. And Dr. Daggett, I personally reached out to you so you could be on this episode 1 year, because Agile Evolutionary Group, right? One of the inspirations for that came directly from your brainchild with the International Center for Leadership and Education, and then now SPN, the rigor and relevance framework, right? That played an inspiration to my framework, the disruptive excellence framework. So your work has been inspirational and influential to me. And I want to say thank you for everything that you've done for my career, especially, providing the feedback to the disruptive excellence framework when it was just a conceptual model that was on a sketch on a computer. So I really, really appreciate that, Dr. Daggett.
Thanks, Michael.
Absolutely. So now getting into the podcast, and I can't wait to hear this answer, Bill. I cannot wait, because you served in many, many roles in pre-K through 12, including at the state level in New York. You founded the International Center for Leadership and Education. You have chaired numerous national and international commissions. You serve on many boards, and you currently lead Successful Practice Network. Your impact in the education ecosystem has expanded past 40 years. But what song defines Dr. Bill Daggett's equity stance in education?
Michael, it was interesting when you told me ahead of time you're going to ask me that question. I began to think about it. And Ray McNulty.
Yes, of course.
And Ray and I asked Ray what he thought. And the person I think that answered that question for me was my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably going to surprise you. It's a song, and you may not know it unless you've ever listened to country western music. It's called Meet in the Middle.
Okay.
By Diamond Rio. And it talks about, the song is about the fact that we all have strong beliefs. We all have ideas. We all have our own passion. But you got to listen to the other person too.
Mhm.
And you got to meet in the middle. And Michael, unfortunately, our nation seems today not to be able to meet in the middle. And you can't be pulled by the extremes on either end.
Right.
And truly impact a community, a school, a state, a nation. You always got to, so you can have your beliefs, but listen to the other beliefs.
Absolutely.
And so, as you know, I've always been a really strong advocate that our schools are designed for a century that passed us by.
Yeah.
That's more true today than ever with the explosion in AI.
Yeah.
And yeah, what I say is you got to care for the present before you drive people to be totally future focused, which is what I want to do. But here's the reality. Michael, our teachers, our administrators are physically and emotionally exhausted after the last 3 years. They're dealing with learning loss. They're learning with kids who are coming to us with fundamentally different attitudes and beliefs. We're dealing with safety issues. We're dealing with labor shortages. And to say, well, Bill Daggett said be future focused, you got to meet in the middle. And so I think Meet in the Middle by Diamond Rio, which is a song I like a lot. But Bonnie said that defines what she has watched my work be through the decades.
Amazing. Amazing. And Dr. Daggett, when you talk about meeting in the middle, right? And when I think about this, and I'm going to take this right from Dr. Ray McNulty, this polarity, right? This polarity management between, ensuring that the reimagination, right? And what we were saying in the Learning 2025 National Commission, re-engineering, right? Of what the business model looks like now, moving away from the batch industrialization that still is lamented in our classrooms today, but also recognizing that we have a new student coming in, 3 years of COVID, right? The physical and emotional toll that is taken on our leaders and our teachers as well, teacher shortages that we're experiencing. This is a huge conglomerate to really go deep into the education model and change. But when you say meet in the middle, I completely agree with that, right? And Dr. Daggett, I want to just extend on that just a little bit more. When we're facing this macro level conundrum with multiple shifts and changes in education, and we know that there are some core variables that we still that are still plaguing the education model, our classrooms, leadership. How do we find that polarity or that meet in the middle during this time of crisis?
Great question, Michael. First of all, it's hard for people to conceptualize a different model.
Yeah.
And so I think we talk about change a lot in education. My entire career, people have been talking about change.
Right.
But change means you're going to tinker with what existed. The question is whether we need change or transformation.
Yes.
And the reality is we need transformation. Away from the one-to-many concept. As a teacher, I'm in front of the class, 25 kids, to true personalization.
Yeah.
Our schools were never set up for personalization, Michael.
Right.
Just look at the classroom in the districts that you manage. Physically, they're set up on the same footprint as prisons. Yeah. Everybody in their own box. Bells ring and you go.
Yeah.
Kids don't learn at the same rate.
Right.
Kids have different interests and aptitudes. And AI today permits us to truly transform the system.
Absolutely.
And so, but you got to show people what would it look like, because and I don't mean to be critical by this. Most educators liked school when they were kids. So they went to college to major in school, so that when they graduate from college, they could return to school to do to others what had been done to them. And everybody they interact with, they're kind of in that same paradigm. And so what we've been attempting to do is say in every school district, and Michael, I saw it in the buildings in the district that you manage, you can take a third of the staff and get excited and say, I want to try something different. Right. Another third say, well, maybe, but how does it relate to the tests, and who's going to train us, and where am I going to get the technology? They're not negative people, but they're overly cautious. Then there's another third that say, don't mess up my laminated lesson plan.
Yeah.
And so when I say meet in the middle, and when I say try to find, create, if you will, a vision of what it should be like, we have to change our professional development model and focus on the top third.
Mm-hmm.
And connect the top third up across school districts in the country. Mm-hmm. And let them be the trailblazers, kind of light the path for the rest of us. Because if we empower them to change, we're finding they will change. And the middle one third will watch. And once that begins to work, they will follow. But if a school administrator today tries to change a whole system at once, I predict they're going to crash and burn, because of the polarization that exists, because of the social media out there that can rip you apart, and that bottom third would fuel it and destroy you. And so go with a group that want to come with you. And so you care for the present, taking care of those who are just, kind of, they're working hard, but almost treading water, while you really spend your limited resources on that top third. Absolutely. And again, the middle third, we find I'll follow, but it takes 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. Problem is, most people who really want to change want to be revolutionists, Michael, and revolutionists get killed. Mm-hmm. You got to make the change evolutionary.
Absolutely. And Dr. Daggett, when you brought up the one third theory that you always, highlight, and it's so true. I always reference back to Everett Rogers' work, right? Around, the 2.5%, who are your innovators and then your early adopters, right? I'm thinking that the 1/3, the trailblazers, are those innovators that can lead and help support that, as you clearly articulated, the transformation, including AI, right? That interface with AI. But we'll go a little deeper with that later within the or in the podcast episode. But your landmark conceptual frameworks, I want to highlight that and talk about that. The rigor and relevance framework, right? The Daggett system of effective instruction. Dr. Daggett, that has been underscored nationally and internationally, where it actually was underscored within my work for such a long duration, when I was a teacher, superintendent, all of that. But it also serves as the inspiration for many of the conceptual models that we see out there, including mine, as I alluded to at the outset of this episode. But when we think about the rigor relevance framework and the Daggett system of effective instruction, right? Now we're in the AC stage of education. As we're now moving into the second year of the AC stage of education after COVID, what does rigor and relevance look like in the context of education experiences for students in Generation Z and Generation Alpha?
For years, Michael, kids have asked, why do I have to know this? Kids have stopped asking that question. They just said, it's irrelevant. I don't need to know this. So the obedient kids will do okay. They'll do the A and C work using the rigor and relevance framework, because they got to do that, quotes, to do school. And that's why we see the kids increasingly disconnected from our classrooms, increasing attendance problems, all the issues schools are dealing with. So, part of the rigor and relevance framework is there's academic rigor as defined by Bloom's taxonomy. Okay. Low level is, of Bloom's is understanding, awareness, understanding, application within a discipline. And our kids can kind of do that and we can kind of test it. But the upper levels, analysis, synthesis, evaluation, we don't have a way to assess that very well in any state or national test, and we're all driven by state and national tests. So we're somewhere between A and C. But if you remember the application model, which runs across the bottom of the rigor and relevance framework, level 1 is I have knowledge. Level 2 is I apply knowledge in my discipline. 3 is I can apply knowledge across disciplines. Most districts can't get into level 3.
Right.
Because we are regulated, certified, tenured, and contracted by a 20th century model. What you used to hear me speak about, Michael, is you got to get them to level 4, be able to apply knowledge in real-world predictable problems to situation.
Yeah.
Michael, in the last 6 months, it has all changed. Level 4 is no longer adequate.
Right.
Because of AI, if you can write an algorithm for any task, there's no human being can compete against AI.
Right.
The estimates is that AI functions at least 100,000 times faster than a human being's brain. So we got to get them to level 5, real world unpredictable problems and situations. And interestingly enough, that's where a lot of kids would like to get, but they have no clue how to get there. And so we've got to really shift our instructional programs. And if you buy into the rigor and relevance framework or your framework or any similar framework, we have to move from a classroom structure that is command and control.
Correct.
To a classroom structure that is engage, inspire, create. And where do we see that? We see it in some of our elective courses. And why? Because the elective teachers have figured out they got to engage, inspire, and enable the kid to create, or the kid won't take the course. The core academic that we embrace so deeply, which is more A and C. Hey, Michael, those teachers don't have to do anything special. They're still going to get those kids.
Right.
Because it's a requirement.
Right.
When we look at K-12, you know who's really good at it? Kindergarten teachers. But what did we do over the last decade? We became so enamored with state testing and our in-state testing that we kept driving the academics earlier and earlier and earlier. Ask any kindergarten teacher, any first grade teacher, any second grade teacher, with no additional time. And something had to give. So what gave? Things like structured play and so on, which are more down in the B quadrant. But you can't get up to D if you don't have B. You can't get up to C if you don't have A. And so what has happened is the system is designed for A. In a world where kids will not put up with it if it's not in B and D. And the reality of it is more now in D than in B. So the gap between where our schools are today and where they need to be, both in terms of the kids, their aspiration, and the world we're preparing them for, the gap has never been bigger. But Michael, the gap is not academic. The gap is interpersonal, self-leadership, lots of skills that we know the kids need, but we are not adequately focused on. We're just frustrated because the kids don't have them.
And Dr. Daggett, you highlight a lot. And just for my audience, if you are not familiar with the rigor and relevance framework, there's 4 quadrants. quad A, quad B, quad C, and quad D. And if you, the axis, X and Y axis features the knowledge taxonomies, and what Dr. Daggett was talking about was the application models, right? And when I think about the application model, level 5, when I think about the highest level in the taxonomies and get into quad D level instructional programming. Now, when I think about it from a broad sense, Dr. Daggett, you highlighted for me, and this was more of an implicit theme, is that there's a design gap right now of what we see, where there's a systems gap when we think about delivery of instruction, monolithic tactics of disseminated information, and then also state testing, all in that quad A, but our economic demand is at that quad D level, right? So, Dr. Daggett, this is a subvariant of a question, is that now, how do we get, how do leaders and how do executive teams close the design gap between the design of our instructional model systems, i.e. quad A, where the student experience, i.e. has to be in quad D, but there's the design features that support quad A. What would be my tactics or strategies to now start shifting my system to a quad D system that mirrors the economic demand?
My answer might surprise you where it starts.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't start with playing with the regular relevance framework, and I just wrote this, A, B, C, D. It's, you and I know what that means.
Absolutely.
The first step is building a culture that will support change.
Yes.
And that's our biggest problem right now, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Building a culture that will support change. Everybody supports change until it impacts them.
Right.
And so I spend a lot of time, Raymond Nolte spends a lot of time. I don't know if you remember Robert Peters.
Absolutely. Dr. Peters, how are you?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time with all kinds of groups talking about the need for change.
Yeah.
The easiest ones to communicate that to is the one I suggest you go after last. And that's the kids, because they know it's broken.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And you alluded to that.
Absolutely.
And if you don't want to fuel their frustration, you got to start with the boards.
Yeah.
And our challenge right now in the country is our boards have become so politically polarized.
Correct.
They're not talking about these important issues. In addition to the board, then you got to talk to your staff and your community to talk about, you've heard me say this, if you got a son or daughter who's a preteen, teen in their early 20s, how many of you hope they become independent in the next decade?
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, of course,
Mm-hmm.
And well, what are the skills they need? Because, Michael, do you know anybody who's ever been fired because of lack of content knowledge?
Right.
They get fired because of these self-leadership, these interpersonal skills. They don't get fired because of what AI can do.
Right.
Content. They get fired because of what AI can't do, which are the self-leadership and the interpersonal skills.
Absolutely.
Okay? And so you got to start with creating a culture. Then you got to give people hope. I'm going to try something with you, and we'll ask everybody who listens to the podcast to do the same. And I can see you're writing, so do this. I want you to write the Roman numeral IX. Just write it down. Got it?
Got it.
What number is that, Michael? IX.
That is 9, correct?
Right. Okay. With one line and one line only, make that a 6. I can see you're frowning.
Dr. Daggett, you always got us doing something. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to stop you because total silence there for 10 minutes. It could be 10 minutes and you may not get it. Or
right, Dr. Daggett, right.
Anybody in the podcast, I bet you almost no one can figure it out. I do this in presentations all the time. Michael, I did a couple of weeks ago with 5,000 people in the audience, and I gave them 3 minutes. 7 people had it.
It's only 7. Okay, so I don't feel so
okay. Put an S in front of it. You got it?
Oh man, a ism, right? One of the isms.
Yeah, I give you that simple example to help drive home a message here. You couldn't see it,
right?
Because you were thinking about Roman numerals,
right?
We can't see a different school system because we're thinking about the system we know.
Wow.
And so remember earlier I said the top third, or you mentioned, some of the research says even the top 2.5. Find the random acts of success out there.
Yeah.
And we have them. We have some incredibly successful examples of districts that are getting the D. By the way, if you get the D, you'll knock the socks off of an A or C test. Okay? But what we try to do is bring those random acts after an awareness to people's attention and say, have you seen this? Look at this.
Yeah.
Look at this example. So we increasingly I'm taking videos of those examples. And after awareness, we need to change. The question is how? But here's an example.
Yeah.
And then step number 3 is preparing and supporting school leaders.
Yeah.
Okay. But they've got to see where it's got to go. And they got to figure out how to navigate. Michael, we both know all kinds of superintendents, great superintendents that had landmines, blow them up.
Yeah.
We got to help them understand how to get through those. And then step 4 is train your teachers on it.
Absolutely.
Okay. But you don't start there. You start with culture.
Absolutely.
Then an image of what could it be like. And then the administrative leadership and structure. Ultimately, then teachers. And so, while I mentioned AI several times in the podcast, it's just a tool.
Right.
The teacher, the administrator is the pilot. AI is simply a co-pilot to help you.
Absolutely.
But you're in control. Don't think it's going to control you.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Dr. Daggett, thank you. And, you've always articulated that culture, right? Culture, organizational culture. It is so critical. I'll never forget at one of your keynotes, you always said culture eats strategy.
Yep.
And you are so true. And that kind of was like an epiphany for me, like, oh, wow. Because if you think about at that time, I always was looking at strategy, how to be able to define, delineate, and ensure that capacity or capabilities are modeled and aligned to the organizational strategy. But when you say culture eats strategy, I'm like, yes. I mean, Dr. Daggett is so target and right on with that, and really appreciate those 4 key points as well. And hope, all right, and finding those random acts of success because they're out there. And now this is underscoring this, right? Because this kind of leads to the work that we did for the Learning 2025 National Commission. And Dr. Daggett or Bill, thank you for choosing me as one of the commissioners, 33 commissioners for that, because you and Dr. Dan Dominique, right, the former executive director of AASA, both of you served as the chairpersons for this commission, the Learning 2025 National Commission on Student-Centered and Equity-Focused Education. And the dialogue and the process, Dr. Daggett, of developing this report, for me, I'm speaking individually and independently, this was a true professional learning conglomerate for me, as well as I'm just learning from everyone. I infer that everybody learned from each other in that. But my question now is rooted on this holistic redesign, right, of what we talked about and what we developed and generated in the report. Now, how do you alluded to it within your last answer, but I really want you to go deeper with this, right? How do we create whole learner focused and future driven environments, right? Aligned to the 4 domains within the Delta 2030 study that was released by McKinsey Global Institute. How do we get there with that? I know that the report, critical components of that report speaks about that, but you as one of the chairpersons of this commission, what does that look like? Whole learner focused and future driven environments.
And Michael, I think you start with, it relates to the question I asked a couple of minutes ago, where I said, asking parents if they want their kids to become independent as adults. Mm-hmm. The American education system for the last couple of decades has said college and career ready. Mm-hmm. We don't mean it. Mm. We simply don't mean it. Mm-hmm. We mean college ready. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Next grade, next test, next level of education. Mm-hmm. And for the kids that can't quite make it, we'll give them a little career program in 11th, 12th grade.
Right. Right.
That is not career ready, Michael.
Right.
And if you go back to the McKinsey report, mm-hmm. which talks about cognitive skill, yeah, which talks about interpersonal skills, self-leadership skills, digital skills.
Yeah.
And you get serious about them and you try to line them up against the college-based academic curriculum.
Yeah.
Tony Wagner says they bear no resemblance to each other. Right. I actually disagree with Tony. I believe that they bear a little resemblance to each other. He says none. And so how do you change its paradigm?
Right.
We get serious about our end goal.
Mm-hmm.
Is the end goal college? Or is the end goal independent as an adult? And nobody wants to talk about how well or how badly we're doing in higher ed in this country. So let me give you 3 pieces of data. Of those kids 6 years ago mm-hmm. that entered college, 2 or 4 year college, mm-hmm. 43% have graduated. Can you imagine if our public schools had a 57% dropout rate?
Right.
Nobody talks about it.
Right.
That's a real problem. You know, it's a bigger problem that kids whose families are at or below the poverty line, the completion rate is 13%, Michael.
Wow.
That is a national disgrace, not of those kids, but of this nation.
Right.
But the one that is the real kicker to me is the third piece of data.
Yeah.
Of those who have got a college degree. Now remember, most didn't make it.
Right.
Those who have a college degree.
Right.
41% of them are in jobs that require absolutely no higher education.
Wow. So
I keynoted a couple of state chambers recently, annual conferences, and both states used the data I just gave you. If you take it all out, that's a 16% success rate. Right. Of those who go all the way through college and end up in a job that prepared them for something that required more education. And so recognizing that in culture trumps strategy, as we said here several times, what we've got to do is begin to say, well, what does a career-ready K-12 higher ed curriculum actually look like? And that's where you go back to the very report, Michael, you referenced, the McKinsey report. It tells you. It tells you what those skills are. And so, and what we have is in college prep, the capstone experience is AP and IB.
Right.
Okay. I believe in a career-ready education experience, K-12. The capstone experience is CTE. But we're making CTE as if it's the whole career ready. It's not. There are the other skills that are so very, very critical. And, Michael, it's more about, we don't have time to get in it in depth today, but Michael, it's more about instructional practices than it is per se curriculum.
Right.
But it's also about our assessments. And you can assess these other skills, but you have to do them with rubrics and other scales that I mentioned earlier, not with our traditional assessment tools.
Right.
The final point I'll make about all that is, culture trumps strategy, but Michael, you can't go faster than the rate of readiness and trust.
Right.
And in the last couple of years in this nation, there has become less and less trust in our education system, partly because the political arena has begun to make that the place that we have the greatest polarization. And so it goes all the way therefore back to the 4 steps I mentioned earlier. Create a culture, train your leadership.
Yeah.
And, show people what it looks like, train the leadership, train the teachers.
Absolutely. And Dr. Daggett, the metrics that you provided are simply profound, right? A 57% dropout rate, right? That's pretty compelling.
And with deep indebtedness.
Right. I mean, this is, and to my audience, this is the first time, obviously, when I with Dr. Daggett, I learned something new every time. But this is profound, because now when you think about the graduation rate at 43%, right, where now the completion rate of 13%, but here's what's stark. And I just want to kind of expand on this, Dr. Daggett. 41% of the graduates, right? They, the jobs that they're in now do not require an advanced degree or a college degree. Right, any degree. So, and the hyper perseveration on this college ready design, implementation, instructional practices still is rooted in the pre-K-12 model, right?
Yeah.
So let's expand beyond 2030, 2040, and we're going to talk about AI in a minute, but essentially, am I hearing Dr. Daggett, within the next, I would say roughly 7 to 10 years, a college education is not going to be needed?
It's not 5 to 7 years. It's sooner.
Sooner. Okay.
Number one. But there are a number of professions and occupations it will still be relevant for.
Gotcha.
Okay. But college has got to face up to this. What you major in matters a lot.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And colleges have exploded in what they call general studies, just accumulation of courses. It's not going to pay you dividends. And I think overall, and college presidents know this, deans know this, they're already talking about a lot. They know they're in trouble. Not Harvard, not Duke, but a lot of them are in real trouble, Michael. And one of the reasons is what AI, what automation did to blue collar workers last century. AI is doing to knowledge workers.
Yeah.
In this century. And much of what higher ed prepares you for, no employer is going to pay you to do, because the technology can do it faster, more efficiently than a human being.
Right.
The other issue that's happening is, have you ever tried to get a tradesman lately?
Right.
Try to get anybody to fix anything for you?
Right.
The advanced technologies, even for the blue collar worker, the trades, require more and more technical skills.
Yeah.
that it's pretty clear in our look with it, working with the U.S. Labor Department, is that blue collar workers over the next 5 to 7 years, their salaries are going to be higher than the knowledge workers. You and I grew up believing that knowledge workers are big more than blue collar workers.
Right.
That whole paradigm is fundamentally changing. And most families, most kids, most schools haven't come to grips with it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And Dr. Daggett, I'm going to get into the question around about SPN, the Successful Practices Network, but I want to be able to kind of continue this conversation around generative artificial intelligence and emergent technologies coming into the education model, right? And I always like to say we have to mind the gap between humans and machines. Now, when I think about that, minding the gap between artificial intelligence and the traditional realms in education, whether it be instruction, whether it be systems design, whatever it might be, right? But this rapid change, I mean, you just alluded to it right now, this rapid change around emergent technologies and artificial intelligence, right, is really starting to move forcefully into education. Now it's not inevitable, right? Now it's not where it's not, maybe it won't happen. Now it's inevitable where it is going to happen. It has to happen, right? But the sophistication that you talked about, these emergent technologies, they're improving over time, over the day, right? And there will be immense cognitive disjunctions because of the fact of the rapidity of this change, and also the students that know or understand or want these emergent technologies in the classroom, Generation Z and Generation Alpha. Now, the economic and educational experiences will differ vastly, right? But you articulated about these changes, right? About technology changing, technology going to be a huge factor in the education ecosystem. So with this algorithmic and machine learning capabilities now in the AC stage of education, how can I start to re-engineer the process to make my teaching and learning organization future driven in this new paradigm, right? Because now is the time we have to be future driven. What does this re-engineering process look like, Dr. Daggett?
You start by using the technologies and letting we tell kids they can't use these when they take a test because they might cheat.
All right.
Or they might share the information with each other.
Right.
In other words, they might either use resources or work with others. Two most basic skills of the McKinsey study.
Right.
We won't let them use because it infringes on our instructional practices.
Right.
So, again, terribly repetitive, culture trumps strategy. Michael, first you got to have people understand that, there's some challenges here, but you can't overcome them.
Mm-hmm.
And so begin by doing this. Tell the kids to use ChatGPT. Don't tell them they can't. Mm-hmm. Tell them to. Give them an assignment to use it. Then ask them to edit what it is written in their voice. Because that's what they're going to use in the world outside of school every day. Mm-hmm. Now, some people say, well, there's no mess up our literacy program. No, it won't. Michael, you cannot be a good editor if you're not a good writer.
Right.
But I can be a writer and can't edit.
Right.
Editing is a higher order skill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Therefore, it raises the bar. It doesn't lower it. Number one. Number two, you want to ask ChatGPT to do something for you? You darn well better know how to write a prompt. Mm-hmm. Writing prompts is a real skill. Writing prompts is the ability to define the problem you want answered. That's a literacy skill in the 21st century. And so my advice is get close to what they're really going to use and rethink and re-engineer what it is we have to expose them to. The reality of it is the kids are better at the technology than the teachers in many cases.
Yeah.
So start there. But then figure out what are the instructional practices the kids need, because their ongoing interaction and AI doesn't scare me actually as much as things like TikTok, social media, YouTube, all those, because we're not paying enough attention, Michael, to the growing research about brain research. And today's youth have a thinning of the prefrontal cortex. Great research out of Stanford on this. And the prefrontal cortex, amongst other things, are responsible for organizational skills, ability to focus, adaptability, creativity, all things every teacher is telling you the kids increasingly don't have. And the McKinsey study said they need more of. So what kind of instructional practices do we need to put in place that compensate for? Because if you Michael, if you think about the technology, it's stimulus response. It's quick. That's why they want everything instantly. They get everything instantly. So what you got to do is change your instructional practices to give them long projects and activities where they have to work as a team, where there isn't a right and wrong answer, where it's trial and error along the way to develop perseverance and grit, none of which are measured on the test.
Right.
And our schools aren't designed to do it. The other thing we've got to figure out then, Michael, and this one I know is really controversial with people. The real world doesn't function one discipline at a time.
Right. Correct.
Kid in second period, the teacher has no idea what they did first period or will do third period. And so you gotta break down the barriers between disciplines. I recommend to districts that they eliminate department chair people, ultimate gatekeepers to the past. Good people working hard, focused on their content. You ask any middle school or high school teacher what they teach, you know what they're going to give you? Name of their discipline. Okay? We got to find a way to break it down, give them major projects that cut across disciplines. Again, technology can help you do that. I got a grandson who loves to play basketball. And he's got a great teacher down in Union County, North Carolina. They're doing some unbelievable things. Good. Do you know that sports is all applied math and science?
Wow.
Ask any kid that loves sports and say, well, let me show you how, or figure out how this relates to SGPT. How's this math concept relate to basketball?
Yeah.
Kid will get excited about it, do it, engage in it.
Engagement.
And so there are a lot of strategies, Michael.
Yeah.
But it all begins with the culture to say, I'm willing to do it.
Absolutely.
AI is fundamentally changing the world.
Yeah.
It's going to change what they do in their personal life, in their workplace. And schools have got to figure out how to get aboard, start with that top third.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Daggett, really appreciate your answer with that, because if you think about this podcast, right, I try to ensure that this podcast is a mechanism of professional learning where they can use this in an asynchronous manner to go back and be able to unwrap some of the strategies as well as research and data to be able to apply their practices. So this is actually an example of how artificial intelligence is redefining learning at the adult level, andragogy. So if we can impact adult learning the way that we're doing now, i.e. this podcast episode can be played in an asynchronous manner, how can we advance technology into our schools and ensure that AI is a part of the vertical organizational thread? So thank you for that answer, Dr. Daggett. And that whole trial and error, right, is kind of like, now we can add in the education vernacular that we can be iterative with specific prototypes and experimentation. you know the you know the trouble that I got into when I started using experimentation and prototype in the BC stage of education, right? You're not going to experiment on my kid with technology. Well, now when we think about it, just a few short years later, experimentation, trial and error, iterations of different prototypes, and these experimentations of various AIs are now needed into the education model for value capture, value creation. But the Successful Practice Network, Dr. Daggett, before I get off, or before we end the podcast, has been your latest educational endeavor after you built the world-renowned International Center for Leadership in Education, ICLE. For my listeners, if they are not familiar with your current work, what is the Successful Practice Network, and how can I contact a representative from SPN if I'm interested in joining the coalition?
SPN is the natural evolution from ICLE. It's what it is. In 2003, now ICLE was started in 1991, the International Center. 2003, the Gates Foundation approached me about wanting us to really, they liked our work and they wanted us to find the districts that were doing the best in the country around what we were proposing. In effect, Quad D work, Michael.
Absolutely.
Gave us a very large grant. I hired Ray with that money. So Ray began to run the Successful Practices Network. Now, you knew me well, you knew Ray well, and I bet you never knew we didn't work for the same company because we were in the same building. I was CEO over both groups, okay? Ray ran the Successful Practices Network.
Yeah.
What happened is Scholastic bought the International Center. And then Scholastic, with some mergers, ended up selling it and other things to Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And it became part of a very successful, great company, HMH. But I felt they began to lose their focus a little bit and felt we needed to get back to where we were pre-2003, which is simply go find the best practices in the country, wherever they are, and showcase them. It's my SIX versus IX example. Simply showcase. And so we're back doing that. The last 2 years, we've done it in partnership with AASA. A year from now, next June, we're going to run a national conference, which will be in effect what the old Model Schools Conference used to be. The best cutting edge practices, wherever we find them, elementary, middle, high school, across the country, and then providing follow-up site visits into those districts. And then providing districts a support at the administrator teacher level to try to implement them. That's SPN. Anybody wants to, easiest way I could give you any number, but I'll give you my email is the easiest, and it's really easy. It's Bill, my name, at B Daggett, my name, .com. I got multiple emails, but that's one everybody remembers the easiest. Bill at bdaggett.com. And Michael, congratulations for all you have done. Thanks for being a change agent. We're all proud of everything you've accomplished, Michael.
Oh, Dr. Daggett, I appreciate everything and, supporting me with this endeavor, the book. I remember when I was superintendent, I was a part, I believe, Dr. Daggett, the first cohort of SPN's transformational network. And it was such a great learning journey and collaborative experience of learning with other superintendents around the country. So your work has impacted me immensely, and thank you for that. And Dr. Daggett, I got to ask you one last question before you go, right? And this is the final question. I don't want to end this podcast. I don't want to end this episode because you know how much I love you and my affinity for everything that you do. But what 3 words do you want today's VFE audience to leave with regarding the new vision of public schools and the AC stage of education?
Relationship, relevance, rigor, which is the opposite direction of what we used to say.
Yes.
Begin with relationships, figure out what's relevant, you'll get the rigor.
Absolute, Dr. Daggett. I remember in the BC stage of education, it was rigor, relevance, and relationships. Now, the disruptive model of it is relationships, relevance, and rigor. Dr. Daggett, you have lasted. You have sustained, right? The 1 hour on VFE. It is such an honor and pleasure to have you on our 1 year or celebrating the 1 year anniversary of AEG. And I had to get my long-standing mentor to celebrate 1 year with me. So thank you, Dr. Daggett, for everything that you've done in the education ecosystem.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. And on that note, onward and upward. Have a great day, everyone.